Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA. And each episode, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I am thrilled this week to have my special guest and great friend, Jose Alberto Cortez, joining me today. Jose, thank you for being here. Tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Hi, Todd. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be on your show. Thank you. My name, as you said, is Jose Alberto Cortez, and I am the CEO of Alberto and Company. And I run this company with my husband, Sean Pack, and it is a teacher stationery and teacher apparel brand that we started here in Fort Worth, Texas, and it just kind of has taken off.
Well, I'm a big fan of your company and your work, and I know my wife is obsessed with everything, as well as I know like so many teachers. Where did Berto and Co. even come from?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. And I absolutely adore your wife, by the way. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her throughout these past few years and her brand as well. And she's just adorable. So, but I just wanted to say that. Um, but yeah, I've always been kind of a stationery addict myself and just a paper fanatic. And whenever I started teaching, I really saw that I needed something that was going to kind of help me stay organized and help me just keep track of all of the things. There's just so much to constantly keep up with. So I ended up creating my own planner and I uploaded it to Teachers Pay Teachers. And I saw that there was kind of more and more like requests for it to be a hard copy item. And so I started selling it on Etsy. And then one thing led to another. I ended up going to Get Your Teach On as a teacher myself. I met the Kings there, and they were the ones who essentially were like, "Hey, let's see if we can work together on something." And they helped me build my business. I started traveling with Get Your Teach On, and one thing led to another. And it's been an amazing journey. Our business has grown tremendously thanks to Get Your Teach On, and then also just word of mouth and social media and all of that.
Well, and I know, you like every small business starts, you and Sean started out of your home and gave up your dining room and all this space. And I know now you've got more space as it's began to grow. What has been the biggest thing you've learned throughout this process of, starting your own small business?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's so funny that you say that because I mean, we never expected it to, it's kind of funny because, you start something like this, and I mean, teaching is still a huge passion of mine. And it was what I thought I was going to, grow very old in the classroom, like doing with my little cardigan and um, I had that, envision for my life, which was great and everything. But when I started selling this and it just kind of kept growing, it was one of those things where I just had kept pouring my heart into it. And I just kept saying, I'm going to see where this is taking me. It's always been about just allowing it to flourish on its own and letting the journey just kind of take us as it has and wherever it goes, and just being open to that because obviously it's been very scary. Sometimes we've had to make very big decisions, financial decisions, etc. But like you said, even with our house, I mean, it started as such a small thing in our front office. I was actually making the planners at the beginning. I was actually printing them out and I was putting every little piece on it. Like, whenever we started, I wanted tabs on our planner so bad. I was like, it has to have tabs because teachers need tabs, right? So I was putting every single tab on the planners myself, and I would stay up until very late making the planners, and then waking up and going to work the next day. But it was such a passion. It was so exciting. It was exciting to see it grow. It was exciting to see that teachers, they were able to use it and it was able to help them. And it was that kind of a thing that just kind of kept us going. So once we started actually manufacturing them, which that was a whole crazy thing in itself, because I'll admit I've always been very ambitious, but kind of like I need someone to push me. I need like someone to be that voice that kind of pushes me to that propels me and inspires me. And Sean is always that. So he's always been that. He's always been more kind of like how would I say, like, not only is he a realist in our relationship, but he's also kind of that push that I've always needed. And so he told me, he's like, you can't keep doing this because it's wearing you out. So let's look into manufacturing them. Yeah. So that was scary, but we did it. And when all those boxes came in, there was nowhere else to put them but our living room. And the boxes just kept coming. It was just one of those things that we couldn't believe it. We were so blessed, and we saw the demand, and we just kept ordering. So it truly got to a point where you would walk into our house and it was like box central.
I love that. Well, I think that's so funny, but it's such proof of when you put all your heart and soul into something and you really believe in it, and your products have just really connected with educators because you are one, and so you know what you wanted, and you start from that point of I wasn't doing this to make money. I was doing this because there was a need, and I filled the need, and I created, and I just love that. So and the idea of this podcast is for me to bring people on to tell pieces of their story. And I know the company is a very large piece of your story, especially moving forward because of all the great things that you're doing. But I know another part of your story that not a lot of people may be familiar with also ties in with the month of April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month. And tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up for you, and why this month and this idea of child abuse prevention and getting the word out there is so important to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually really looking forward to speaking with you today because of this. I'm super passionate about it, and it's really one of the reasons that I went into education. And so I'm happy to share my story. I haven't really had the chance to do that much. So yeah. I guess I'll just kind of go back and kind of tell you, like you said, my childhood and what kind of led me into education was a lot of my life, and what I went through as a kid is what kind of led me into this journey. So I guess I'll go back and just share my story, a little bit about my family. So I'm going to kind of go a little bit before me, just so you can kind of get an idea of like how everything came to be. So, we grew up, my family is originally from Mexico, and my grandmother actually was from Juarez. Her whole family grew up in Juarez. And, she didn't really have much. They grew up very poor, and they were a very hardworking family and everything like that. My grandma had three sisters who were all around the same age and whatnot, but she was the oldest. And when my grandma was like 15 years old, she tells us the story that she was dating somebody, and my great grandma was like, you need to be home, at this time. Like, she had her curfew, and if you're not home, you are not coming in, and she was very strict like that, very Catholic family. And so one day she passed her curfew, and she came home, and the doors were locked. And that is kind of what started a lot of stuff, which is really crazy, to think of something so small starting such a big journey. She basically was kicked out of her house, and she says that um, it was obviously like super traumatic. And as like a 15-year-old, you're like, what? But like her mom was super strict, and she was like, you had rules and I told you them, and da 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 da, and now you have to, figure this out. And so my grandma says that she went through a lot during those years trying to just figure out life. And she ended up in a relationship herself, where she ended up having my mother very, very young. When she was like 18 years old, she had my mom and my uncle when she was 17. So she was still a kid with kids, and the person that she was in a relationship with was very abusive towards her. And so she was just trying to like get through life, and I think like a lot of like, I think back and I go, I know for a fact that a lot of what I hear that my family's been through is what has always given me so much ambition to just like keep pushing forward and just trying to have, such a I wouldn't say a better life, because I'm not saying that they had a terrible life, but you know what I mean? Like, just try to really do something with what I'm given, and so anyways, my grandmother was able to eventually get, her mom to let her back in. But at that point, actually, my great grandmother had moved to the U.S. And so with all of my grandma's sisters. And so they took my grandmother in with my mom as a baby and everything. And my grandmother just talks a lot about like just the struggles of all of that, and just having been through that abusive relationship and all that kind of stuff. So my mom growing up didn't have much either, and she didn't have a dad, and so she kind of I'm not saying had like a horrible childhood, but she definitely didn't have that that childhood where you just have, you know what I mean, like you're just kind of gifted with having both parents and everyone, just that normal kind of, you know what I mean, that life. And so so my great grandmother took care of my mom for most of her life, because my grandma was trying to work and try to put food on the plate. So my great grandmother was the one who kind of took care of my mom and my uncle and stuff like that. And then I'll fast forward to the point where my mom ended up in some relationships when she was like 17, 18, where she ended up having me and my brother. So she kind of almost like did the same thing that my grandmother did, and having kids very young. And she was also struggling, so it was kind of this cycle, like of just not having much, but trying really hard to work through it and provide, And so and again, when my mother was in relationships throughout her life, they've just always been just, I don't know. I would have to say, like, unfortunately, she was just in very bad relationships, and um, with my dad, actually, she was with my dad when she was like 19 years old, and he ended up passing away in a car accident. So I never actually met my dad. And he actually passed away before I was born. They were just kind of dating. It wasn't anything official. She was 19, he was 19, type of thing. Um, and so, yeah, so we grew up without a dad as well, and it wasn't until, and we also grew up with our grandparents, because it was, like I said, it was like this cycle where, again, she was a young parent. She was, having a hard time, providing for us and all of that. So she was working while my grandmother was taking care of us, and anyways, so it was like around first grade and I don't have many, honestly, I don't have many memories of my childhood. I think it was a lot of traumatic experiences that I just think, like, you block it out, like I don't remember a lot, but the things that I do remember definitely impacted me in some way, whether it was a positive way or a negative way. And they kind of just stuck, and so, around when I was in first grade, because we kind of went back and forth. We would go to Mexico and live over there for a while, and then we would come to the U.S. And it was mainly just because, my mom was having a hard time and she just needed help, and my grandparents were in Mexico, so they helped raise us, like I said. But again, so when we were in Mexico, or when we were in first grade, we moved to the U.S., and my mom at that point had met someone that she was in a relationship with. They ended up having my younger brother. And honestly, that was like, it's so crazy to think that that was only like 5 years of my life, but it has, like, always stuck with me. It was like the worst 5 years of my life. And in some way, shape, or form, like, I have been impacted by that forever, and in ways that, are obviously very traumatic and hard, for me to process. But then at the same time is like, I use that, and that fuels me to just keep going, so I'll just tell you a little bit about that. So essentially, she was with a man who, he was just very abusive. I mean, I think back at those days and I just don't understand. I had a really hard time understanding, especially as a kid, how and why, like, my mother was with someone like that. Like, why do you love someone like that? I mean, we were having like a beautiful life with our grandparents in Mexico, and then all of a sudden we are like, it was almost like prison in a way, like we wanted to get out. Like, I just remember me and my brother always trying to, like, devise a plan to, like, get out of the house. Like, how do we run away? Like, where would we go and what would we do? We would always be thinking about those types of things. Because he was like I said, he was very abusive. He was physically abusive, verbally abusive. I saw things in elementary school that, I mean, no one should ever see. I mean, he was just, he was a drug addict, and
now, was he physically and verbally abusive to just your mother, or to other of y'all in the family as well?
All of us.
Right.
All of us. It was like, especially like if my mother wasn't home,
Right.
she was away or something like that. Like, we were not his kids, and he definitely let us know that and feel that, and he just did not care. And he was just always angry.
Yeah. Now, going through your own head in this time, I mean, I know you're young, so you may not remember all of it, but some of the things that people who haven't been through these instances sometimes ask is,
Oh, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well,
you said some of the things.
Yeah, some of the things that adults who haven't been through this sometimes wonder is why the kids don't speak up. And so, in this instance, and you're going through these terrible things as a young child, do you remember telling your teacher or other adults at school? Or do you remember, like, I'm just not going to say anything because it's going to be even worse at home? Like, what do you remember what was going through your head
Yeah.
during that?
I vaguely do, but I do know that during that time, I was seeing a counselor at school. I remember that I don't know who set it up or like how it happened, but there was someone that would speak to me like twice a week, and they knew. And I know that there was a lot of stuff going on probably behind the scenes that I didn't know about. Probably the school reaching out to like probably CPS or whatever needed to happen because, I mean, it was very. I think that, and especially just knowing me, I'm a very like sensitive person, and I like wear my heart on my shoulders. You can tell when I'm sad, when I'm mad, when I'm really happy. And so I think that, I look at pictures back during that time, and there's not one picture where I'm smiling. Like I was sad in every picture. And I remember I had bruises like all over my body all of the time. And so I know that they saw that. I know that they knew that. And I was very scared to talk about stuff because I didn't want to like get more in trouble. I didn't want, like, I don't even remember him to ever saying like, you better not speak a word. Like he never said that sort of a thing, but I was just so scared of it happening or something coming from it that I just think I shut down. But I do know that the school obviously knew what was going on or was or had a hand in it. And, like I said, they would get me out of class. I would go to the cafeteria, and there was this counselor that I would speak to. And I remember I would tell her a lot of stuff, So I
Well, and
remember
I
she
think
gave
that's
me
important for
this
people to
little,
hear is that when you go through these situations, sometimes people think that why didn't the kid say anything if it's such a dangerous place? But I think it's exactly what you said is when you come from an abusive situation, the person doesn't even have to be threatening you not to tell. When you're that age, they're the adult in your life, and when things get bad. When mom upsets him or when you upset him, what happens. And by telling people this, it's going to upset him. And so without him even saying
oh yeah,
anything, you just naturally go, I know the consequences. And at that age, you can't comprehend, like, well, somebody could help me by taking, like, you don't even comprehend those kind of things because that's the person in charge in your life. And I think that's what
yeah.
people
And
forget a
that's the
lot when they
scary
wonder
thing
why people
because,
don't speak up.
exactly, exactly. That's the scary thing because, yeah, you, you see all these things, all of these, even when I was teaching, we would have people come into the school and talk about like, inappropriate touching and stuff like that. And you see the videos where it talks about all of that. And, it tells, it's very like encouraging to telling the kids, like, you've got to speak up, you got to say somebody, talk to an adult and this and that. And yeah, like, I just remember, I didn't ever go through like any type of like sexual abuse, but even just being like physically abused in that way, it is so scary because, like you're saying, like, I mean, yeah, a lot of times you could be threatened, like if you say this, this will happen, or I will hurt this person in your life, or you're going to upset your mother, like stuff like that. Um, but you're exactly right. It's just you're in a state of panic and you're just trying to not be abused
Right.
anymore. So whatever you can do to lessen that or to prevent it, like you do it. And if that means just not saying anything at all, like you do that. Um, because I remember even like, like I said, there's a lot of things that I don't remember because I just kind of I think I mentally shut a lot of things out. But some of the things that I do remember, like one time I remember very vividly, I was in fourth grade and I had gotten home and I did not have my keys with me. And I just remember I was panicking because I knew that I was going to be in trouble and I was going to get hit. Basically, he was going to like lose it and take it out on me. Just because I forgot my keys at school, like that simple, thing, I just knew like it was going to be the biggest deal and I did not want to get hit. So I'm like, what do I do? I mean, school was pretty far. It was like up this like massive hill. And, for a fourth grader, it just seems like it's miles and miles away. And it was super hot. It's here in Texas, and I just remember going back to the backyard. We had these massive dogs and they were just jumping all over me. I was crying. My nose was bleeding because I was in panic. And I was trying to get my bicycle because I was like, if I could get my bicycle and I can just ride up to the school and grab my keys and come back and he'll never know. And then I couldn't get my bike out. So I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna walk. And I started walking to school. Here I am, like this fourth grader, just like in the middle of like traffic. Like it was so hot outside. I remember I was sweating. I was dizzy. I was crying. My nose was bleeding. And I just remember I finally got to the school, walked into my classroom. Mrs. Ford was there with the janitor, and I passed out. I just couldn't remember like what happened next. I remember her like waking me up and, like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was just like, my keys. And it was like, I remember like going, like running to my desk, looking inside my desk, there were my keys. And I just was like, my whole like world was fine at that point, and so it's just like, I just remember how scary that was and how like traumatic it was just to forget your keys. And I mean, how sad is that, as a fourth grader, like I am terrified to do anything wrong. Like I just was trying to always be perfect and just to, I had to have like amazing grades. And it wasn't even just to, to be a better person or to be a good student, but it was because I didn't want to get hit. Like I didn't want someone to beat me up because I wasn't making good grades, and because that's basically what would happen. And, I remember seeing a lot of things. Like I remember seeing my mom just like with blood, just like getting beat up, like, and my brother and, it was like the most, like, I just don't ever wish that upon anybody. But what I can say is that through all of that, school was everything for me. It was everything because I had nowhere else that I felt safe or that I could go. Like that man, like he basically told my mom like that we were not able to see our grandparents anymore. So for like 5 years, I wasn't even able to see my grandparents. Like they were the ones that we felt that love with and that safety with, and we had everything stripped away from us. So when I was in school, it was like a breath of fresh air. And I just remember every day when I was in school, I just felt like calm and safe and loved. And I loved that feeling, and I never truly not that I didn't understand that, but I never truly, like, how do I put this? I never truly like made that connection with elementary school, even as I grew up. Because honestly, I think that when you're going through all of that, you're not thinking, you're just surviving. And eventually my mom ended up like, it was fourth grade. I remember like towards the end of fourth grade, we basically got called to the office. My grandparents were there and we were so happy to finally see them after all these years. And they were like, let's get in the van. We're heading to Mexico. And we were like, we didn't know what was going on, but we were heading to Mexico and we were happy with that. I was also a little bit sad because I didn't get to say goodbye to my friends. It was just kind of like, hey, we're going to Mexico. And I just remember crying the whole way because I didn't get to say bye to Erica Grant, who was my BFF. But I was also just so happy. I was so happy because we were safe and we were going towards safety, And honestly, kind of the rest of my life, has just been kind of one of those things, just trying to figure out who I was, and especially being a gay Hispanic male in a Catholic family and in a society that hasn't always been favorable to us. Has just there's been so many difficulties and so many challenges that have presented themselves throughout my life. But what I can say is that ultimately in my adult life, there was a moment in time where I had an advertising degree, an advertising bachelor's. I could not find a job anywhere. And I was working at Albertsons. I was the HR manager, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, would you like to come and have lunch with my daughter at her school? Like, we're gonna go do Thanksgiving lunch." And I was like, "Yes, I love your daughter. She's so cute." And so we went to her school. This was the first time that I had been in an elementary school since I was in elementary school. And I can't describe it to you. I just really can't. I can't even put it into words. Walking in that school was life changing for me. It was this feeling that I can't even describe to you, but I just felt it. I just felt like it was calling to me, and it was kind of that I ended up realizing, it's like everything just kind of came back to me, and I go, this is where, like, this was my place. Like, this was my safety place. This was what brought me joy when I was little. And I came back home that day and I told Sean, I said, I want to be a teacher. Like, scratch everything that I've been thinking and doing. Like, I want to go to school and I want to be a teacher. And I am so blessed that he has always been so supportive, and he just was like, okay, let's do it. And so, yeah, so one thing led to it says that my mic is muted. Can you hear me?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so one thing led to another, and I got back in school. I got my master's in education and teaching. It was very awesome because I started teaching at that same school that I walked into. I started my student teaching there at that school that my friend invited me to go have lunch with her daughter.
I love that.
And yeah, and then I got my teaching job, and it just has been amazing ever since. But yeah, that is basically how, like, my journey that got me into the classroom.
Well, and that's what my whole passion was behind this podcast, Jose, was allowing people the opportunity to hear stories. Because, I think if somebody were to look at you and your successful business, they aren't going to see the things that built you into this person on the surface. And I know this has not been a topic that you've talked heavily about, because, when things happen to us, whether it's in our adult life or our child life, it's really personal. And sometimes we can be afraid to talk because it's like we don't want other people to think we're talking bad about them because of what we went through. But we also don't want people to, and sometimes for me, it's like we don't tell pieces of our story because it's like, well, I mean, it never naturally comes up in conversation. It's like, oh, we're hanging out with friends. Oh, let me tell you about what happened when I was 5 or 6. Those things, but those things make us who we are. And I think, people like you, when you get out there and you're brave enough to tell pieces of those stories, I think it allows other people who've been through similar situations to go, okay, it wasn't just me that went through that, or I can connect with this person on a different level now because I really associate with that. And so to you, I would say, especially during this month of Child Abuse Awareness Month, just that thank you for being brave enough to share some of that through this conversation, because I know it's a part of your story. I know it's who you are. I know it's personal to you, but I know it still doesn't make it any easier to talk about sometimes. So I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability and being able to share that journey.
Well, thank you. I am so glad that I got to. Honestly, um, it's one of those things like you just said yourself, like it's not something that comes up in conversation. You don't just like, it doesn't just, it's not something that I'm going to write like in my bio, like about me page on Berto and Co. You know what I mean? And I've gotten to that point in my adult life where I feel so blessed that, I've had, a lot of amazing things happen to me, and we've been able to grow the business where we've gotten it. But there's still that part of me, that knows that a big reason why I'm where I'm at right now is because of everything that kind of just like led me to that place.
Right.
And so a part of me wants to share that. And so I'm really happy that I was able to today, because I think it is important, and especially this month. And especially right now that, I've been seeing a lot of posts that talk about how, just remember that right now, school was the safe place for a lot of kids, and that has now been taken away from them. And so I can't even imagine if that was me, like if this was life right now when I was younger, like I can't even imagine what would have happened. Like if like everything was taken away from me and I didn't even have that safe place to go to for the rest of the school year. So we have to keep that in mind for those
And
kids.
I think that is hugely important to remember is, we talk so often on social media right now about, oh, look at the parents learning how to be teachers and things like that. But if you pay attention to the statistics going on right now of the domestic abuse calls and the difficulty at home, whether it's food or emotional, and I think it's something really important to keep in mind for the educators who are listening today. Check in on your students. Just tell them you love them, send them a message, write them a note, because that may be the only thing they're holding on to right now.
Yes, that
So,
is. Oh my
Jose,
gosh.
thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing your
Oh, thank
story.
you.
You are such an inspiration to me. You're such a great friend, and I was so excited when you agreed to come on. And I think that this conversation is really going to really affect a lot of people. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd. You are also an inspiration to me, and I'm glad that I was able to come on. And thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes wherever you get your podcasts. It's there. I hope today's conversation with Jose has inspired you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.